Yes, love's a secret weapon. Yeah!
Hi, I'm Donna Loren.
And I'm Dr Adam Gerace.
And you are listening to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast. Chapter 16, Sedona, Part 3. My mother ended up taking the journey with Katie and I back to Sedona after my surgery. And CJ was there as well. My mother had 2 reasons to say yes. One was to be a good grandma and help me with Katie. And the second was her obvious infatuation with my lover. By the time we got to Phoenix, the sky was pitch black. Finally, we arrived to the turnoff for Sedona, Highway 179, a 12-mile stretch of no man's land. One of the things Sedona's famous for is the legendary extraterrestrial advocates. Well, we were driving down this dark 2-lane highway, and suddenly my mother, CJ, and I all saw this white light leave the earth and shoot out into space. We looked at each other and said in unison, "Looks like an alien." The next day, I got a call from an acquaintance, Sally Steele, who wrote articles for the Sedona newspaper. She asked me if I saw the white light leave the earth last night because she had seen it and wrote an article that ended up on the front page of the paper. That was my only time I witnessed something like that in Sedona. Being a new divorcee with a young child in a new community put me in an awkward situation. I didn't really have anyone close to turn to, but I did my best to try to nurture a relationship with the director of the Sedona Arts Center, Lucy Banks. She was very puritanical and judged my personal choices, but accepted the effort I put into helping the Arts Center. I met my neighbor, a lady named Yvonne, who had a daughter going to the same school as Katie, and we became very friendly. Nevertheless, I wasn't forthcoming about my circumstances, so I put on a good front to be strong as a single mom. Divorce is hard enough, but the change I was demanding of myself by moving to a new community was harsher than I realized. In the mornings when I'd drop Katie off at kindergarten, I would get all dressed up and spend my 3 hours in town while she was in school. There were so many different really gorgeous hotels. I would make a habit of finding one that was especially compatible with my mood. Lower on the creek, it was called L'Auberge, and very romantic and very quiet and isolated from the hubbub in the community. And I was in the middle of winter, and as the days grew cold, I started adding a shot of cognac to my morning latte. So I was wasting my days in depression. Every Friday, Katie and I would drive down from Sedona to Phoenix and then hop on a plane to go to LA for Katie to be with her dad. By Sunday, we would be making the trip back to Sedona. She and I were leading a very ungrounded lifestyle at that time. To keep busy, we would get dressed for dinner and go out every night. And one of our favorite places had a valet service. A young man named Greg, who looked like Ricky Nelson, made us feel very welcome. And on one occasion, I decided to have a chat with him. I asked about his family and told him that Katie and I were new residents in the community. He arranged for us to go to his house and meet his family. His father, Carl, was one of the chief architects in Sedona and was married to Patty, who was a kindergarten teacher in a different district than we were living in. Greg's sister, Laurel, was a 16-year-old girl, very talented young woman who was a dancer. I thought it was a good idea to ask her if she would teach Katie, which she agreed to do. It was good for Katie to have some other activity in her life, and she seemed to enjoy it a lot. Well, this relationship with Greg and his family blossomed into a lasting one.
I think perhaps many of our listeners would be able to relate to some of the experiences you're talking about, Donna, that if they have experienced a end of a relationship, particularly a long-standing one, it seems that you were entering or continuing in a process of grief or a process of working through that loss very much at this time.
Oh, yes, Dr. Adam. Grief and loss is a very familiar theme in my life, going back to the very beginning, with my mother and my biological father, and so yet another loss, of a long-term marriage, 3 children, children scattered, in various areas. My son off to an East Coast school, and decided that he would prefer individuating that way for a year, and my eldest daughter, staying in Los Angeles with her father, and my youngest with me in a different state, in a community that I love. I still love Sedona. I love visiting it. But when you're not feeling grounded, and you do feel lost, uh, I I think that physically and mentally it becomes so challenging that, normally I never drank alcohol.
Mm.
So for me to even think about including that in my, in my routine, and fortunately, I chose to add it to something that was caffeinated, and and I did it, hopefully mindfully enough so that by the time that I needed to be responsible and pick my daughter up and take her home, that I was cognizant, and
Mm.
I didn't want to abuse myself, but I think depression for me is a way of describing not wanting to feel.
Mm.
Is
Mm.
that something familiar to you?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think sometimes these things can even start that ultimately it is about just not wanting to feel. And so, starting with what seems like, okay, it's winter, I'll have a shot with a coffee, and that tastes nice. And then before we know it, these habits can start to become not great and not serve us. It's kind of interesting. I remember many years ago now, I used to hang out with a friend, and I don't think either one of us was in a particularly good place at that time, and we kind of did something similar. We'd go out for a coffee, and at first it was we'll just go out for a coffee and catch up, and then it was we were going to add we'll have a shot of Tia Maria in it. That's kind of nice, and then before you know it, you're having 4, 5, or 6 of them, which is not a great the caffeine and everything else and in the middle of the day. But I think we do a lot of these things sometimes because we just want to have that pick me up, and we can sometimes lose control of them if we're not careful, because
Mm.
it's like everything else, isn't it? It's at the fundamental level trying to medicate yourself, or to just feel better, or to avoid something perhaps, and it can start off very small or very logical, at least in our heads, and get out of control if we're not careful.
Yeah, I think the application that I kind of adopted was very moderate, very modified,
Mm.
and I wanted to see life as beautiful.
Mm.
I didn't want to see the dark side in that time. I was in Sedona, which is a gorgeous place.
Mm.
And as I said, I chose this cafe by the stream, enshrouded with, sycamore and maple, and, a running water, and very, very quiet, and, kind of like sitting next to a babbling brook. And I was really trying to like you said, avoid, the misgivings of having to break up a family over, disharmonious, how do you say, disharmonious relationship, and then try to keep your life organized as well as possible. But you see, that was my history. I always had to endure those kind of underling feelings, of loss and grief and not belonging, in my early childhood, throughout my adolescence, into my young adult life, and live this other life, as a public person, that was so gratifying, so fulfilling, to be able to connect with other people outside of that little world I called the nucleus, and be able to relate on a more joyous level. So, and of course, I don't know how it affected my daughter, but we were both so alienated that I think I missed, in 1 year that I was gone, I missed maybe 3 times, 3 weekends, that I just didn't have the energy to drive and to fly back to LA so that Katie could be with her father and her sister.
And that certainly, I think, just can also just wear you down as well. But I think this is really interesting, this idea of what we've spoken a little bit about before, is that often sometimes our approaches to difficult situations are borne out in the ways that we were raised, or the ways that we have previously responded. And in your case, there was a lot of in your early life, a lot of emotion, but it was often quite hidden, or it didn't necessarily make sense because there was a family secret. And so you often had to put on this, happy face out in the public eye, which, to some extent was true, because you did derive joy from those experiences. But at the same time, it's about always having to put some sort of positive spin on some difficult emotions.
Yeah, and as I kind of came to understand more and more with your help and other counseling, what anger, is integrated into your being, and, how much you can face, what you're willing to face, and sometimes you harbor it, for the entire lifetime. In my case, it began emerging, and I, it's taken me decades to really get to the point where I can actually admit to you and to our dear Love's a Secret Weapon family community that I'm discovering self-forgiveness, which, I always thought I would ask for forgiveness of others. And therefore that would lead to forgiveness of myself. But I now understand that everything is internalized, and the forgiveness begins with yourself. It also, I understand, you and I have talked about this a lot, is loving yourself. Well, that comes first, but we're not taught to do that as commonly as we're, criticizing and trying to be as perfect as possible, and never being able to live up to that if you are in an environment where you just never feel accepted. And those patterns are perpetuated. And yes, I carried it into my first marriage and my children, and the way I behaved. It wasn't clear to me, that I consciously or unconsciously was perpetuating, what I learned from my very young years of being raised in a family of lies.
Yeah. And I think as we develop this idea and talk more about this in the coming chapters, we'll see, and the listeners will see this way, that you are able to use a range of factors, including therapy, in order to understand some of these roles that we assume in our families, these roles that we, others in our lives take on. And when we unpack them and we realize whether they suited us, whether they were good for us, whether they were confining, whatever they were, when we can start to see them for what we are, we can begin to break some of those patterns, albeit it can be a really challenging experience at times.
Yeah, I think I may have mentioned this, but if I haven't, I think each one of us as individuals have our own pain thresholds.
Mm.
And some of us have a greater capacity to be able to go to those depths. And others, many of us, myself included when I was younger, I just probably just didn't have the capacity to deal with that pain. And of course, that's when you use substances to cover it up or disguise it. And, it's a way of dealing with the pain that's all too common. But, little by little, as I discovered the truth about my life, the truth literally lifted that dark curtain. And, little by little, I would say there were many curtains, many layers, that I have to keep unveiling, to deal with it. And this very recent epiphany of being able to forgive myself has been a total revelation.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we often don't think about when perhaps we think we have acted in a certain way that we shouldn't have, and we need to seek forgiveness from others. But I don't think we also look at that idea of forgiveness of self, because that transcends whatever another person decides. Whether they decide to forgive us, they don't decide to forgive us, is ultimately their business, as hard as that is, particularly when we think we've made amends, and we just want that opportunity to show that. But what is so important, I think, is that ability to work through it and to engage in self-forgiveness. There's a range of research that tells us how important that is. So, I think this is a really big topic and a really important one to mention, because I think we've spoken about compassion before, and the idea that we're often very compassionate to other people, but don't direct that compassion inward, of being kind to ourselves, of seeing our failings as something that everyone experiences, and that's okay. It's human to fail, and to be, hold what we've done kind of mindfully and not become so over-identified with it, or so ruminative about it. And I think self-forgiveness is part of that as well, that when we can start to see those failings, but realize that they're not representative of the person we are, we might have done something that we would have preferred not to have done or regret, but that doesn't necessarily have to translate into making us a shameful person, taking it on and seeing it as, well, that's the kind of person I am. I think that's really powerful and important.
You know what happened, honey?
Mm.
I think forever, that when I asked for forgiveness from others, that it was still coming from the mind.
Mm.
And I truly believe that through this podcast and through our relationship, that my awareness is very centered in my heart. So that's the key for me. You can't ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness comes when you're ready for it. And I am ready for it now.
And now I think it's time for music, and particularly because we talk about, and we know, and I think our listeners know as well, that music can be so healing. And this is a song we have played a little preview of previously in an episode that Donna recorded during this time that we're talking about in the chapter, but it has never been released before. And so Donna would like to share this with our Love's a Secret Weapon community.
Within our hearts, within our hearts, our land is safe high in the mountains, where the loving folks shall be, and the fish down in the river, oh, they're vine will today. By the bank's rising cliffs dwelt a gentleman, protected by the land. And this house we are a-building will bring peace for all of us. And the only consolation will be a lasting trust within our hearts, within our hearts. Our land is safe high in the mountains, where the loving folks shall be, within our hearts, within our hearts. Our home is safe high in the mountains, where the loving folks shall be, where the loving folks shall be.
And speaking of music, our next fan guest is very involved in music, being a musician, and we really enjoyed talking to him, didn't we, Donna?
Oh, Andy Nazzal, he is such a love bug. Oh my goodness.
And it's interesting because some of the music that he's involved in is called exotica, which has a long history and crosses over that history with people like Les Baxter, who was involved in the Beach Party movies, as well as someone who you knew quite well during this period of your life that we're talking about and beyond.
Martin Denny.
Yes, Martin Denny, and as part of
Oh my gosh, yes.
yes.
Well, my dear father-in-law, Cy Waronker, introduced and signed Martin Denny to his label Liberty Records, and had all that glorious exotica music and those phenomenal album covers coming out on Liberty.
Well, with that, it's over to our conversation, speaking about all these things and many more with Andy Nazzal. Well, here on Love's a Secret Weapon podcast, we are thrilled to introduce our next fan guest, Andy Nazzal. Andy, it's nice to have you with us today.
Oh, what an absolute thrill it is to be with you, Dr. Adam, and of course, Donna. Hi to both.
Hello, dear Andy.
So good to be with you.
Fantastic. And besides being a fan of Donna's, which we'll talk about how you discovered Donna's music soon, but you two have another thing in common in that you've both actually performed at the same music venue, Tiki Oasis.
We have. And wow, was that something, huh, Donna?
You performed the same time I was there?
We did. I was there that weekend with my band. Yeah. And it was on a different day, so I was able to see you.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, because I wasn't aware of that. I'd love to hear your music, and will you tell us about it?
Oh, I'd love to. Well, should we start at the beginning, as they say?
Please do. Yes.
Please do.
In the beginning.
How did I let's get to the how I discovered the wonderful Donna Loren. I grew up in Milwaukee, a child of the 70s, and it was a very happy young childhood. Had all my extended family full of characters in love, and Milwaukee was just a great city to spend those formative years growing up. During that period, you had all that sunny music, Stevie Wonder, Chicago, Doobie Brothers, Marvin Gaye, Sly and the Family Stone. It was just a fun time to be a kid. And when you knew your first love was music, as was the case with me, you were in heaven. So that was great. Then you had all that spillover from the recent 50s and 60s, still a big part of the influence on society and general life. So from my parents, who were original rock and rollers, they introduced me to Ricky Nelson and Fats Domino and Chuck Berry. And then from the wacky uncles, I got the Beatles, the Who, the psychedelic music. So it was around that time when television was going from 4 channels to 5, which meant the affiliate station that popped up suddenly gave us these choice pop culture shows that are, pretty iconic today, like Gilligan's Island, Batman, Laugh-In, things like that. And this is where Donna enters the storyline. It was on Saturdays when they played some of the more serial movies, and this is when I was introduced to all those idyllic AIP beach movies. So I must have been about 7 when I became aware of Donna through those beach films. And for some reason, I instantly really dug and appreciated the Donna songs. I also developed a little crush on Donna and one of the other gals in the film, Mary Hughes, but Mary didn't sing. So my attention went to Donna. Okay. So the power in her delivery is what really knocked me out. Here's this lovely girl next door type who can absolutely knock the roof right off with that powerful voice. She was just amazing. And I became aware that Donna seemed like she always had her own spotlight. And to me, that instantly made her special. So here I am, landlocked, this blue-eyed, blonde-haired, long blonde-haired kid with endless energy. And I yearned to be one of those surfers and one of those musicians in those movies at the same time. I wanted to be Mickey, Dora, and Dick Dale at the same time, but only if I could hang out with Donna. So it was a pretty fixed big fantasy that was playing out on my young mind.
I'm blushing.
And it actually became more or less a reality as the years went on, even culminating with being close to Donna as she sang. But yes, I'll get to that story in a second. So I had mentioned Batman earlier. And so like every other young boy who loved those Batman episodes, and every year as the series chugged along in its syndicated loop, I got my annual fix of Susie the cheerleader. And it was so cool to see Donna act like this on this cartoon come to life, which kind of brought this new dimension to Donna. It's wonderful that Donna played opposite the great Cesar Romero. As I got a little personal story, that was my paternal grandmother's biggest celebrity crush. Okay, now
no doubt.
Wasn't he something, huh? So magnanimous.
Yeah, particularly in his early days. Yeah, my goodness.
But Adam, even when he was 90, oh my God.
Well, to that, my grandma was of Hungarian Czech descent. She grew up in Palestine, spoke 5 languages. She led a really rough life trying to make a good life for my dad and his 2 siblings following her divorce in the 50s, which was like wearing a scarlet letter.
Wow,
right?
absolutely.
Oh, yes. God, yeah, sure.
But she was so strong. She was an amazing chef who taught me to cook, and now I make those dishes for my family. But now bringing it back to Donna's co-star, Cesar Romero. One of my favorite quotes from my grandmother, this little angel of a woman who never lost that thick Eastern European accent. She was heard to say on more than one occasion, referring to Caesar, she would say, "Honey, he can leave his shoes under my bed anytime." So Donna, your co-star had that much of a grip on my family's matriarch.
Oh my goodness.
I love it. It sounds almost like something Rita Moreno would say in
no
One
kidding.
Day at a Time.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so now we get to the 3rd time Donna's presence came into my life again. And this is now I'm a teenager. This is in 86. And MTV does a big marathon of the Monkees. And being a huge fan of that era and that time and never having seen them, this was like experiencing a pretty good chunk of mid-60s pop culture that I hadn't yet experienced. So I bought a bunch of 8-hour VHS tapes and taped every episode, watched them through several times over. And sure enough, as if on cue with a little remember me, who's this lovely Princess Colette that Davey gets his obligatory starry eyes over? And yep, sure enough, there's there's Donna once again. So it was like, yeah, boom, here's this rare, cool woman who can act great, sing like gangbusters, making herself known in yet another part of my life in a different way. So it was just, it all started with Donna in those beach movies, wanting to live that idyllic life of surfing and music. And how great for me that life certainly, you know, more than imitated art, as now I've been very blessed with an exciting and certainly varying career in music. And now I'm living near the Washington coast. I've been surfing for over 20 years and I just love it. It's so therapeutic.
So you manifested your dream.
I did. I did. And I'm very, very happy that it went that way. Actually, remember
that quality, you know, with great patience, Andy. You know, you have a very special quality when someone can manifest their dream.
I appreciate that. I really do. And it's not something that, you know, has not had its ripple effect. The best surfer in the family is actually my hippie, almost 13-year-old Sammy, who's also a gifted pianist, bassist, and multi-instrumentalist as well. And
he started where you left off. Come on.
I think so. He just took second in a surfing competition a few years ago, so I'm taking my cues from him now. But
man,
but
that is so cool.
Yeah, those beach movies had such a huge influence on me, and my sons surely grew up watching those DVDs since birth, and it's carried on to them. And yeah, it was just huge for them to meet Donna a few years ago at Tiki Oasis. So it's amazing to see how life unfolds as it has. And now Donna has been a part of my son's life since they can remember. It's just pretty wild.
That's fantastic. That's great. And so the teenage Andy, is that when you first started in music and started your interest in the type of music that I guess is inspired by the 50s and 60s?
So as far as my musical career and journey, you know, on that side, it's been crazy. And it's one that did lead to me meeting Donna near the peak of my band's existence in the Tiki world. But getting to that, my maternal grandfather was an incredible polka and jazz drummer. My mom was a wonderful pianist. And then when I was 5, piano lessons began for me. And I had 2 older brothers that were taking lessons on different instruments, and I started playing theirs when they weren't looking, the drums and their guitar. And so all three of us took lessons from the same teacher who came to our house every Saturday. This wonderful man named Mr. Farver, larger than life, bearded, charismatic multi-instrumentalist who just excelled at every instrument he did. He was so kind, and his influence over my acclimation into becoming a multi-instrumentalist, I guess it can't be overstated. But to my family roots, definitely music was so much in the blood. In fact, the person I guess I could say in the family that's had the most success was my dear great cousin who recently passed, Lee Hale. And Lee had an extensive career in singing groups in LA and New York. He even worked in a vocal group with future exotic pioneer Les Baxter.
Les Baxter, another beach party connection too.
There you go. Isn't it something? So he eventually became a sought-after arranger, and his talents led him to becoming the musical director of the Dean Martin Show from 65 to 74.
That's right.
That's a huge accomplishment.
Isn't that? So yeah, every song that happens on all those classic Dean Martin shows were chosen by my dear, dear cousin. He was also on the board of the Professional Dancer Society, and he co-produced their annual gala at the Beverly Hills Hilton, where all old Hollywood stars were honored. And I was so thrilled to attend with Lee what would turn out to be his final gala there. So to meet Dick Van Dyke and Lee's best friend Mitzi Gaynor, that wonderful Spitfire.
What legs? Oh my God!
Oh, no kidding. And then spending the afternoon with George Shakiris, Russ Tamblyn, and the cast of West Side Story. I mean, it was absolutely surreal. And I was so proud of Lee fighting that damn cancer as he was. Yeah, to have been there with him for that final celebration was a real highlight of my life. And for me personally, he's really helped me understand the business side of the industry. And I do miss him. Yeah, he's the musical hero of the family. So for my own path, once I started those piano lessons, I incrementally started to teach myself these growing numbers of instruments that built and grew around our family room. I was playing about a dozen instruments by the time I became a teenager. And my first gig ever was New Year's Eve, 1985. sadly, the night of one of many of our musical heroes, Ricky Nelson, died in that horrible plane crash. It was a real emotional introduction to gigging, that's for sure. So to get what you were saying, yeah, we did like classic rock, you know, songs of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and that band evolved into one with my two older brothers and another talented guitarist from England, and we had our own fan base of sorts here in the Seattle-Tacoma area during that whole grunge era, and I started to compose for myself. We didn't get a contract with Sub Pop, but by the time we disbanded, I had a catalog of about 30 or 40 original songs that I made some really strong demos with and hung on to. And trust me, this story is leading back to Donna, so hang in there.
Oh, no. We're just, as always, Andy, we're just interested in hearing, you know, our guest stories. And this is fascinating because there's so much connection between a lot of what we speak about.
For sure. So I fell for jazz really hard in my 20s, and I discovered that there were these two minor session playing legends that were performing every weekend down the street from me at this funky little cocktail lounge. These two gentlemen, Johnny Lewis and James Moody Thompson, they backed the likes of Lou Rawls, Della Reese, Sammy Davis Jr., and when they were playing gigs in Las Vegas, and I became really close to Moody, and that ended up with me playing percussion with them. They invited me to play percussion with them. I played probably about 400 gigs with them. So
that's amazing.
Doing that was like going to percussion school. You know, I knew I had to play at the top of my game with these two incredible pros, and it really helped me. So at this point in my life, I was playing about 35 instruments as music just became more and more voracious to me. And during a short period of time, when I was a stay-at-home dad to Joe and Sammy when they were really young, while introducing them to all these great beach movies, I discovered this side genre of music that I vaguely remember from my childhood called exotica. And so I've been an audiophile since buying my first Beatle LP when I was 13. And now this newish entity called eBay, along with the growing information that this internet thing was putting out, I completely threw myself into this dreamy world of exotica. And hey, quick side note, some people believe that it was Donna's ex-father-in-law, Cy, that coined the term exotica. But
and it's not an ex. He made that quite clear with me. He made that quite clear. He says, I am your father-in-law. I mean, seriously. So, yeah, and he found Martin Denny found Liberty Records, and that became a union, yes.
Isn't that something? So here I am passionately researching these pioneers of exotica, well, you know, buying all these LPs from eBay. So I spent 2 years just listening and studying this rich, sweeping, picturesque songs and planting the seeds in my mind. Hey, I can do this too. And then at the same time, I discovered this resurging little Tiki community and this annual celebration in San Diego called Tiki Oasis, which was just this siren call to me. And that's where I first met Otto and Baby Dill Van Stroheim, as Donna, you know, two wonderful souls who just knocked themselves out putting this big event on each year. And so through this, I connected then with a photographer named Kari Henley, who introduced me to her boss at Tiki Magazine. I was a writer also at that time, and so I joined the staff, interviewing carvers during their quarterly magazine. And then one of those carvers, a dear, brilliant guy named Buzzy, is, along with his gal Christina, is like an aunt and uncle to my son. So this is a real loving community, or it can be, let's put it that way. So after that second Tiki Oasis in 2008, you know, writing for Tiki Magazine, making these connections, I just decided that this growing inspiration and need to record led me to cash out a tiny retirement savings, which I knew wouldn't go anywhere. I made a little recording studio, took those original compositions from the rock and roll days and rearranged them in terms of being exotica. So with all that, it became this exotica tinged Latin lounge, Hawaiian influenced thing.
Wow.
And in 2009, just doing it all on my own with the help of about 30 instruments, I reimagined a dozen of these recordings. I used an amalgamation of past names and created Tiki Joe's Ocean. And in the summer of 2009, I released that debut album, The Exoticating Waves of Tiki Joe's Ocean. And beautiful original cover art was done by a giant in the Tiki community named Tiki Tony Murphy. And then that started my decision to have a different Tiki artist do the cover albums, which has just been so fun to work with them. There used to be this big website called Tiki Central where you could do a lot of self-promotion and, mixing and with others. And, I was blown away by the response from that community. The album went on actually to be nominated for that year's Hawaii Music Award for Best Exotic Album.
Oh my God. So listen, honey, before we go on, would you please at least give us the graphics of your album covers so that we can post them?
I've got so much stuff ready to be sent to you too.
Okay,
you got it.
Fantastic.
Great. Perfect.
That's great.
You got it.
And Andy, when you say, because I've listened to some of your music online, and is that all you pretty much, or almost all you on those recordings, playing everything?
The very first album is all me. Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
It was.
And how many instruments do you think that would have been?
30.
Amazing.
It's fun. It's great. It's great. I was a little bummed that album that was nominated for Best Exotic Album, we lost to, but it's a pal of mine. We lost to this exotic band Waitiki, led by my buddy Randy Wong. But it ended up having legs. My album at Tiki Oasis that summer after it came out. Here now I'm getting approached by Dave Squid Cohen, a legendary Tiki mug sculptor and a real sharp jazz-minded drummer. And he insisted on being on the next album. The same thing happened with this real character in the Tiki community called Marty Lush, who's a vibraphonist and band leader himself. And he had to be on the next album. So,
That is fantastic.
And it just grew. So these two big dogs of the Tiki community are now helping me on the second album, along with guitarist Alika Lyman, the 20-year-old great nephew of none other than exotica pioneer Arthur Lyman. And he just happened to live across town from me, and he answered a Craigslist call looking for a guitarist. So there we go. So
I mean, the manifester at work.
It was something. It was all,
Jeez.
yeah, the magic was happening. Yeah, magic was happening. In between the debut of the second album, I did a Christmas album with David Marty just to make sure we clicked. We absolutely clicked. That Christmas album was really successful. When the second album came out, Under the Midnight Sun, and was nominated for Best Exotica Album once again at the Hawaii Music Awards, And once again, we were up against this brilliant band, Waitiki, but this time I was so pleased and humbled. Under the Midnight Sun won for Best Exotic
How
Album.
awesome.
Congratulations.
That
It
is
was something, I
fantastic.
tell you. I wish I could have attended the ceremony, but my fatherly duties were the priority and still is. But the
Sure.
band further united on a few more albums. We got a call from Otto to headline Tiki Oasis the next year, and that was a hell of a show. I'm just so proud of the diversity and brotherhood and sisterhood of my band. It's a really diverse band. My sons have uncles and aunts from that community, like I was talking about.
All right, so I am here with Tiki Joe's Ocean. I'm super excited to interview these guys. They're playing tonight here at the Valley High.
Yeah.
So if you want to introduce yourselves for our folks at home.
All right. My name is Andy Nazzal. I'm the founder and leader of Tiki Joe's Ocean.
I'm Zarif. I'm the percussionist.
And we have some smaller members.
What's your name?
My name is Sammy. I'm going to do a little skit at the start of the show. And my name is Joey, and I'm also going to be doing a skit at the start of the show.
It's a family affair. I love it.
Otto and Baby Doe's support has been just huge. We've played for Tiki Caliente, and my friend Kari, who I was talking about, the photographer to Tiki Oasis, she created a beautiful Christmas show for us at LA's historic Damon's. So it's just been a blast. But now we have to re-enter Donna to the scene, correct?
Well, that was just spectacular.
It's great. And what sort of comes across to me, Andy, is just sort of listening to you talk about all these people that not only were you influenced from them and you have such a respect for who came before, you're speaking about people like Arthur Lyman and who are just legends in your music area. But the fact you've been able to work with a lot of these people or their descendants in this case, that must be pretty cool.
Very cool and instantly humbling. I mean, you could, when Under the Midnight Sun, won that award, and then we played Oasis, it was really obvious that we are, at the top of our field in the Tiki community for exotica bands. And that was actually kind of a peaking moment for the whole Tiki resurgence. But you got to be humble in that very moment. And like you said, Dr. Adam, realize the great ones who came before you to make this happen for you. And if you're not mindful of that, then you become complacent. You can be very unthankful, and that's simply not part of my character. And so, to what you said, I was well aware of these legends that came before me that, and studying these albums really gave me the power and creativity to add to my musical toolbox, I guess.
Can I add a side note? I just happened to be watching the new West Side Story, Steven Spielberg's. And it struck me, it's phenomenal. It struck me that Broadway went dark when production started. And, and I can only imagine, because Steven Spielberg just comes off like such a man coming from his heart, that he must have thought of all of the highly skilled performers that weren't working. And suddenly he cast a mega amount in this film. Wait till you see the quality of dancing and music. Oh my, I won't even get into it because it's just incredible. And so you, Andy, are paralleling that energy of acknowledging that somebody great is out of work, and hey, let's make something happen during these times.
Yes, I think that's what we're supposed to do, right?
Feels right.
If we can make these connections and grow something positive out of it, is that what this is all about, right? And especially Donna, this with music. Music is such a reaching out mechanism, a connecting mechanism, a loving entity, that it has so much power that, I've always gravitated to the warmth and the celebratory and the loving nature of it. So
it's the best. So
it's the best. It is the best.
Okay, tell us. So you do your piano, you do string instruments. Like, oh, can you tell us how many string instruments?
Oh my gosh, I do play a little as far as classical, a little violin, lots of guitars, Spanish guitar, ukulele, some cello, and then a ton of them are the percussion instruments that I was talking about earlier.
Okay.
All of the guirs, the castanets, cabasas, Hawaiian pu'ili sticks, kula nuts, the orchestral chimes, glockenspiel. It just goes on
Right.
and on. It's
Yes.
just been so fun to be able to utilize that.
And are you sort of self-taught, or did you travel around to learn all these instruments?
The only instrument I ever took lessons on was the piano, and then everything else is self-taught.
Amazing.
It's been a blessing. It's been an absolute blessing.
I mean, that's, it comes from your soul. So
it does.
Yeah.
My fellow Pisces, I hear you. So getting back to our friend Donna, it was Tiki Oasis 2016. And once again, Tiki Joe's Ocean is performing there, supporting our third release, Soul of the Sea. And the performers sometimes become aware of who will be on the bill several months before the show. But I remember being made aware kind of late in the game, maybe only a month before the event or so, that none other than Donna Loren was gonna be performing. Oh my, the sheer luck and kismet of this happening was not lost on me. Okay, so I was 7 again. I had butterflies with the idea of seeing Donna live. I'd always wanted to see her perform, and knowing how rare this was, it was hard for me to wrap my head around it all. And I just didn't see this on the horizon. So we performed the day before Donna, and then I stood front rowish. It was standing room only, mind you.
I remember.
Oh, stop! Now you're making me blush.
Totally. I was looking at your face, of course.
I was there with a couple of friends, and Donna, you know this, the anticipation, the vibe, and the crowd was electric. You had a top-notch band fronted by the great Deke Dickerson. Love that guy.
Yes,
I'm sorry. When you appeared on stage, beaming that gorgeous smile, the crowd went bananas. That amazing white outfit that Donna wore reflected the stage lights, so there was a bit of a glow around her. Okay? And what a way to first see someone you've admired and appreciated for almost 40 years, right? So Donna's energy was great, and she gave so much love to the crowd. Professional all the way. Your performing strength and your voice was top shelf. You could tell you were enjoying the experience as much as the crowd. And then once you culminated towards the end with my personal favorite, and I'm sure many other Donna fans, It Only Hurts When I Cry, there was this bit of collective but contained ecstasy that was palpable. Okay, it was just amazing. And it was, of course, so wonderful to meet you afterwards. And this kind, warm, and open person we hear about on these dynamic podcasts, it's the real deal, folks. Okay.
It was lovely seeing you there. I'm so happy that we've reunited, Andy. And,
I really feel, what do I owe you, doctors? Plural.
Just, you know what? A big smile.
I got it on my face, and I feel so, so lucky to be able to speak with you. And the thing that, that it's like going from, the 7-year-old boy where you have this crush on this singer, and she keeps popping out of your life. And then it evolves to this real beautiful, friendship to the level that we can, because, Donna, you're obviously a very busy person, and we have our I've got my life and all that, but to the point that we can connect this way as friends like this. It's so nice to now take this from that, little 7-year-old boy, looking at this beautiful brunette, to now saying, okay, here's this friend of mine who is giving me, such beautiful advice and guidance and love, that it's now our connection has gone to such a nice, sophisticated, beautiful place. So I'm really, really pleased with how all this has happened. I don't take any of this for granted, and I find it to be very special.
All I can say is ditto.
Oh.
And I think that's what we hear so much. Everyone has so many different stories, but the power of these movies or these TV shows to bring people together and to connect with both of us, but particularly Donna, after so long a period, that I think they stick with people, and you take them into your adult life and they influence you. And a lot of people say, oh, well, they're the silly beach party films, but how much they did for people, and how much power they have and continue to have. We've spoken, with some of the other co-stars of the beach party films about this, and that power, but to do that for people. So I think that's really important and shouldn't be understated. But, Andy, I'm also interested because we talk a lot about how you've sort of taken on, the greats and being influenced by them, but you're also a teacher. So you're also passing on your music knowledge and passion to young people. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I, even though, well, let's put it this way. To get to that, unfortunately, my music studio was robbed a few years ago. So I'm hoping to acquire and finalize the next one. So until then, I'm working as an independent music teacher. And yes, I teach a wide variety of students, including, among others, a 20-piece middle school band, a bunch of silly but ever curious preschoolers.
Oh my goodness.
No, it's been crazy. And I'm also a music therapist to special needs young adults at a nearby learning center, which has been really fulfilling, very, very fulfilling. My father started the first Special Olympics in Wisconsin, so that's been in my blood. So that's been one of the most recent gigs I've had, and it's just beautiful, bringing music to them. For Tiki Joe's Ocean, my wonderful right-hand man, in many ways, Marty Lush, he took those first two albums, Exotica Waves and Under the Midnight Sun, and he insisted on remastering them to be released for its 10th anniversary. And sure enough, now those two albums are on Amazon, Apple Music, all those musical retail albums. And to my happiness, my sheer happiness, the remastered debut album, Exotica Waves, went top 10 on Amazon last summer.
That's fantastic.
I know, under the auspicious easy listening category. So we hit number 8, just ahead of an idol of mine, Nat King Cole, but not tough enough to topple the likes of Barry Manilow and a few sensual music for lovers CDs. Right? But I'm really pleased with this renewed success of the first two albums. I want to re-release the third album, and like I said, eventually get the studio going again. But being able to, teach at the variety of levels that I do, and still culminate a band with my sons has been beautiful. So it's always multi-pronged what I'm teaching and what I want to share out there.
That's fantastic. And certainly, I guess during COVID, how have you been influenced by that? Have you still been able to teach and to, I guess you can engage in music yourself, but how's that affected you?
Horribly so. It's when it first started, I went to simply online learning, and then every school, Dr. Adam and Donna, has a different set of guidelines, and so one school I'm still doing online for, and the other one, a few others actually, obviously, I'm doing in person, socially distancing with the masks and all that. And so the one of my main schools that I was working at folded, and that was a huge chunk of income there. So picking up these few others on the way is just kind of keeping me going. So it has been pretty, pretty devastated. I think I lost probably 50% of my income, but slowly climbing back.
That's really good to hear.
I tell you,
Yeah.
it's just such an interesting time that we're living in, that we're all experiencing so much and enduring, whatever comes our way. And, I'm just a huge believer in that the universe does listen, and you're putting out such a beautiful message. And I know whatever you want to do will be heard. And, in time, I mean, patience is also, a big part of what's going on. I mean, Madam Corona has just, put the brakes on for the world.
Yeah.
And so, we have to kind of go back to our senses of, the kind of pace that we were in, and so many are still in and trying to be in. And, we have to kind of think about going forward and how that's all going to happen. And it really sounds like you have all the ingredients for the most delicious cake with all of your music.
My hopes, thank you, Donna. Thank you for all of that. My hopes, once I get the next studio going, is to transfer over to, because I've had so many people just tell me, Andy, this has got to be your next step, is to transfer it over into music for TV and radio and commercials and things like that.
Wonderful.
Because I've got this, having this 10 years of essentially instrumental, background music, to whatever, levels they are. I think that would be a natural progression. So that's something that I'm definitely hoping to pursue.
Well, there's a lot of more Andy on the way.
Thank you, Don.
We look forward to it. And as part of of welcoming guests to our podcast, Andy, we've asked you a lot of questions because we're really interested in hearing about your music and what you do. But we're happy to open up the floor to you if you have a particular question or questions for Donna.
Without a doubt. I love having this opportunity, and don't take it lightly. So thank you. Well, I think one of my favorite parts about this podcast and about getting to know Donna is that we are all being introduced to a tremendous amount of depth of personality here. And there's no surface fluff going on. And that has been a very emotional and resonating thing for me, because of course we all go through tough things in life, but boy, has Donna laid out what's happened to her. So with that said, Donna, again, your struggles, your tribulations when you were so young, the hardships you endured in your 20s and beyond has been, obviously well demonstrated, illustrated in this podcast. And even though it's sometimes painful to hear, in the end, I think your story is one of personal success and spiritual growth. So my question is, can you now, at present moment, identify what it was, what you reached for, or what you clung to keep your resilience high, to keep going despite the pressures from your overbearing mom, the masochistic music industry at the time, all of these struggles that you have endured? Can you point your resilience to one source or energy that has allowed you to have such insight on your life as of now?
Thank you for that question, darling. Simply, I think at a very, very young age, and maybe the three of us can relate, if you have memories very, very, very early on, and I can remember, when I was like 1, that I knew who I was. Despite whatever was imposed on me, I always knew who I was. And knowing who you are connects you to spirit, and that's the source. And that's what I always go back to, always, and commune with. So that's my simple answer.
You had such a strong sense of self that you refused to let those other things overwhelm you. Yes, they affected you, and yes, they hurt you, but you were bigger than the problems that kept coming up.
You know, I have to say that healing is probably my number one priority, you know, and
Yeah.
in whatever modality. And like, I thank God for Adam being in my life for the last couple of decades, and, you know, being able to bare my soul and, you know, and have someone who truly listens and who cares. And I think, you know,
Well, I
so
hope you know that we are all listening, and we sure do care. And it's been so rare to hear this type of raw emotion, you know, from someone that we've all, you know, loved and enjoyed for decades, because you got to know that that helps us too.
we're, like I say, you know, we're all in this together. So let's keep our head above water, you know, and
Yep.
as I think Merle Haggard said, you know, let's call it a rainbow soup. And, you know, and rather than worry, you know, be concerned, try, you know, just understand, you know, I kind of see this big cloud in the sky that gathers negativity and it hovers. And it's like, when I go there, if I go there, I have that to remind me to not go there because I don't want to contribute to it.
Yeah.
Even unconsciously, if I do or if I did, but I don't want to do that now. So, you know, it's a conscious effort, but, you know, it's really staying connected to spirit.
Beautiful. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Andy.
And certainly, we're really pleased to hear from you, Andy, in terms of the podcast, because I think that's what we have tried to do. And at the forefront of it, while we both share experiences, it's, of course, Donna sharing her story to connect with everyone. So we're really glad to hear that everyone is listening and engaging. And with that in mind, is there any other questions that you do have?
You know what? That last one was such a doozy that did it for me.
Well, I want to
Because
say the beat goes on.
The beat goes on. What's funny is Donna's, you know, I had so many questions when this whole podcast began that Donna's actually filling it in along the way. So it's like, oh, that's why that happened. Oh, you know, this is why this happened. So
and when we reconvene, if you have another thought or incomplete, just bring it. Okay.
Would love to. Absolutely love to. Thank you.
And you are definitely an eternal, infinite member of Love's a Secret Weapon.
Yes, love.